Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Today we're in the Barker Gallery at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. My guests are Lynda Lanker and Jill Hartz. Lanker is a painter and the wife of the late Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Brian Lanker. Hartz, Executive Director of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, curated a retrospective exhibition of Brian Lanker's photography. From the Heart, the Photographs of Brian Lanker is on view at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art through April 24th, 2016. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Our pleasure.
Our pleasure.
So here's a question for both of you. Who was Brian Lanker, and what's important to know about him?
You first.
Me first? Oh, okay. Well, we knew him obviously in different ways, right? So I think the important things really to know about Brian are that he was just an amazing photographer and storyteller. So the photographs, that we have in our exhibition are just, say, one image from a story. And he just enveloped you in that story, so you really cared no matter what it was. And that takes a lot for someone that may not be that interested in, say, rural Kansas or something, to like, I want to know more. So he just made you feel part of that. And the reason he could do that, I think, is because he was just an incredible person. So he was smart, generous. He made you feel like you were the most important person in the room whenever you were with him, which is pretty amazing. And I can only imagine what it would be like to be married to him.
Well, that's another program probably, but and that says it a lot. It was such an overwhelming question, and I had to buy some time here to think about how do I, focus it. One of the things about his work is that he wasn't a personal vision photographer, although his early training he spent with an eccentric photographer that taught at Phoenix College, Alan Dutton, and he credits Alan for opening his vision. At that point, he would have been 19 or something, and Alan was a surrealist. He also did some documentary things, but in any case, that was where Brian kind of cut his teeth, and then he was substituting for some photographers at the Phoenix newspapers when he began to try to find where the really good training grounds would be for a top-notch photojournalist. So at that point, he discovered Rich Clarkson, who was in charge of photography at the Topeka Capital Journal. So there, he always was interested in people, but rather than tell the world about his personal vision, which is fine, a lot of art photographers do that, but he was interested in showing people something that they couldn't see that was in the community, and he pretty much put himself in the background. It was always the story and the people that he was interested in that was the most important thing, and he had a very keen eye, obviously.
And I think that part of that, when you're asking what singles him out, what makes him really different, is one of the quotes that we used in the exhibition was the Rich Clarkson, I think, quote. He didn't take pictures, he directed them.
That's Blaine.
Blaine said that. But I think
right.
that, we've talked about this a lot. There are a lot of talented people in the world, and talents, you can have the most fabulous talented person, but if you don't have the drive and the intelligence to figure out how to get done what you need to get done, then you're just a really nice, talented person, and maybe someone will see your work. But Brian kind of knew what he wanted to do, and as you said, he really figured it out. And he was there, if there was an opportunity, Brian was there to take it, if he thought it was right for him.
He was good at research.
Yeah.
And so, he didn't just stumble upon the Topeka Capital Journal. He did research, and he figured out where this paper was, and set his sights on it. And he continued to be very much a person who would do his homework. He tried to leave nothing to chance, but of course, when you're a documentary photographer, there's always chance, and it's, you know, it's great. You can't plan the rainbow over the swimsuit model, or the, you know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
Well, now you can with Photoshop, but then you couldn't.
They didn't have it then, and so it was all the more remarkable. But he didn't want something to go wrong that he could have foreseen, and so foresight was one of his major strengths, and he would prepare and prepare, find out as much as he could about the subject or the location, or so that was something he did. Research. He did his homework.
So he starts his career, as you point out, at the Topeka Capital Journal. He's like, you know, 22, 23-year-old guy. What's distinctive about the work from that period? So there are these black and white photographs of these Kansas people, just regular working class people. What's important about that work in the history of, I mean, maybe this is a question for you. It's like, why is that important work in the history of photography?
I think they're timeless. I mean, I think if you looked at them, you could think of the Dust Bowl. You could think of any of the great documentary photographers in the U.S. and in other places. And the fact that they are just these beautiful black and white images, too, takes you to that point, whether it's, you know, the Americans that so many of us had, you know, as a book in our homes at a certain point. But those images, I mean, already he had his eye. He knew what his composition was going to be, you know, how to get those things. But you look at those and you really get a sense, in a sense, well, for me it's like, okay, these are the 70s. You know, most of this is taken in the 70s. But you wouldn't know, it could be the 40s. I mean, it doesn't matter in a way because it's what rural America probably still is. It's a really hard scrabble life. And there aren't that many people, you know, in some of these towns where the younger populations are emigrating. Or, you know, the wonderful picture of the diner with the waitress on the side and the person having his coffee or his meal. It's like, you know, yeah, that's America, right? I mean, there are just so many of those. And he took the time. I found it interesting because we did a panel with photographers from journalists at the university. And one of them had worked in a small town newspaper. And he basically said, you know, you can't wait for events and news to happen every day in a town. You have to go make that news. You need to figure out what are the photo essays you could do, or what do you really want to explore? And I think Brian, you know, had a long list of those. And that's really what made his mark. It wasn't so much, I'll go cover this fire or, you know, do other things. It was, how do you portray what America and the specifics are about?
Absolutely right.
So one of the early photo essays that he wins the Pulitzer Prize for is this photo essay on natural childbirth. So this is a groundbreaking photo essay, just historically. Why is that the case? What's important about that just in the larger picture? Why is that an important photo essay? So this is like 72, right?
And I think he had a hard time getting that approved to actually do it, let alone the personal nature of this. But
yeah, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But just
right?
for a second.
But you know more.
The publisher was, you know, when the picture appeared in the paper, when the picture story appeared in the paper, he was like, that, you know, we shouldn't have that in the paper. He was, you know, very much, you know, conservative Kansan, and he was like,
yeah, like
this is still a time when
who approved this?
men
Right.
didn't go into the delivery
Right,
room,
right.
and not only was man in the delivery room, photographers in the delivery room taking these photographs of every moment in the process of natural childbirth, and it's on the cover of the paper.
Right, right. And he just knew this was going to be a good story and people had not seen it. And I think he had to fight for getting that, you know, story in there. And then, yeah, as you said, no one thought, I mean, especially the publisher, that it was ever going to become a Pulitzer Prize-winning story. That, you know, it was like, oh gosh, at least it's done. You know, let's move on.
Yeah, right. There'll always be tomorrow's paper, and this one will have fish and wrap up the fish with it. What gave him the idea? There was natural childbirth at that time, the Lamaze method, and there were classes for parents, and where permitted, the husbands could go in the delivery room, and they definitely were coaching their wives, et cetera. But this was pretty new, so. Another photographer at the Capital Journal had run a story about Lamaze's method of childbirth. And it showed the parents in the classroom with the teacher, and they all brought their pillows and were, simulating different stages of delivery. And
No
that was
delivery.
the picture, but there was no delivery. And Brian thought, something really important's missing here, the result. And so he, but he did see the he
other
may
one.
not have been aware of the Lamaze coaching method, but.
So why is this series significant for you?
That's a trick question, but that's okay. So I'm actually the mother in the picture, giving birth to my then husband, Jerry Coburn, to our second daughter, Jackie. And so one day, when we were in the process of the Lamaze class, it would have been in probably, I think they started at maybe 6 to 8 weeks before the delivery, they would start the classes. So we were doing that, and one day I got a call from our teacher, and she said, there's a photographer at the Topeka Capital Journal who would like to photograph a Lamaze delivery. Would you and your husband be willing to do that? And I asked him, and he was like, whatever you think. And I thought, why not? I said, can we get rid of him if he gets to be in the way? And she said, oh, yes, of course. I thought, well, sure, we've got control, or so we thought. But in any case, so he was there, and well, actually, he came out to interview us, and he was, became a friend, and later, after the birth and everything, part of our social circle. So in any case, that was very significant. And ultimately, Jerry got transferred, his job moved him to Dallas, Texas, left our, dear friends in Topeka, and subsequently, and at that point I realized that what was really holding us together was our circle of friends, and that we weren't really, meant to be together. And so I went back to Kansas, and then hooked up with my old friends, and Brian was, we started seeing one another, and subsequently moved out here and got married.
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
And you had two
All
small
of it's
girls
history.
at that point,
we had
too.
my two
wow.
daughters, two young daughters. So it's an unusual
Yeah.
way to meet
Great story.
someone.
Right.
Great story.
Yes.
So another one of his most celebrated projects is the I Dream a World Portraits of Black Women Who Changed America show and volume. 75 black and white iconic photos of African American women. How did that project, where did that idea come from? How did that even happen?
Well, Brian was always, he's always been interested in people that are marginalized in some way. He just had great compassion for and sensitivity to the underdog or the less, marginalized works. That's I'll leave it at that. But a few things that got it kind of bubbling into his consciousness. One is the Democratic Convention, and what year would it have been? I don't know. I can't think now. Barbara Jordan was giving a speech at the Democratic National Convention to support, in support of some candidate. And I don't know, at that time, Brian was watching it on television. And he said to himself, why isn't she running for president? Well, that he just was so impressed with her presence and her, ability, her articulateness and all. And so that just kind of sunk in. And then he read the book, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. And it just moved him and changed his life. Just, really woke him up to the plight of African Americans. And then finally, there was a black woman who worked for my family. And when I was a little girl, she was just, she was like my other mother, Priscilla Williams. And we had been kind of gotten disconnected over many years. And she was then in her, I think, 80s, or maybe at least 80s, maybe early 90s. And we got somebody, you know, we found each other again. She was living in Oklahoma. We were here in Eugene. And Brian and I brought her out to visit us for a week. And we took her to the coast. We, you know, just hung out with her. And he talked to her a lot, because that's just what he did with people. He was interested in her life. And that was kind of the, you know, that was kind of the, put the third piece of the puzzle in place. And he just realized this was something that needed to be brought to the public. This story of these women that had a double bias against them, and yet achieved whatever they could achieve. So
And
that
is that
started
kind
that.
of how he met Maya Angelou then? So did he decide to take the idea of this project to her?
No, and there is in the book From the Heart, the catalog that accompanies this exhibit, Ray, I believe his name is Ray DeMoulin. He was, I think he was a chief, one of the high people at Kodak. And they ended up, Brian approached him with the idea, because they had underwritten some other projects. And that was just a beginning, and then, you know, and they made kind of a handshake on it. But then there came a time, Brian didn't have that many connections, but he did have connections with Life magazine. There were researchers there. So he, you know, he made contact with people that could start making a list of who might be good for this project. So you know, it's collaborative, certainly, right. but he was the driving force. So
he asked Angelou to write the foreword, I think, and he brought her some examples, right, of what he was going to put in there, and she said, "Come back, go away,
do more research,
and come back.
Do your homework. You don't know much about." I forget what her words were. Of course, she's a wordsmith, so they were great. But it's like, you're not ready yet. So come back to me later after you've done more, and he did.
Right.
Lynda, this winter you gave to the JSMA a complete run of these 75 photographs. Why was this an important thing for you to do? Why'd you want to do that? Why'd you want to give that gift? It's an amazing gift. Why'd you want to do that?
Well, Brian and I have lived here 40 years, and this is our museum. We think of it as our art museum. Our family does, and we've supported it for many years. And it just seemed like he would approve of it. You know, he would be pleased to have it here, and it's an amazing museum. I mean, it's a small. In a small town, but it's an important museum, and it's our museum, and I just thought it just belongs here, and
then
anyway.
I didn't have to keep asking.
Yeah,
no,
right.
and Jill did. Jill asked. She said, you know, would you consider it? And at first I thought, you know, it was a couple of years ago, and I just thought I was just still kind of in a fog, I think, after he passed so suddenly. And then last year, it just started a growing feeling that, yes, this is where it belongs. It needs to be here. So and so I went back and said, would you still like to have it?
Yes.
Is the offer still good?
So when you look at the photos from that project, there's so many that are just iconic, incredible iconic photos. And then you think, my God, how many of these photos, the portraits that he took, were iconic? I mean, the photo of Steve Fontaine, obviously, but there's so many that are just incredibly iconic. How did he do that? What was the gift that he had that he could get these photographs and get these people to pose or to allow him to take photos that became these images that we could never forget? I mean, that Prefontaine photo, I mean, it's the most unforgettable photograph. What was the...
Well, but you also don't know whether it's also the most unforgettable photograph because it was his last. You know, there is, the history makes us look at things in a different way too. I haven't seen a lot of Prefontaine photos, so I don't know if he always has that kind of faraway look in his eye or not. But I mean, I think that, and I'm sure you'll have more to say about this, Brian wasn't in a hurry most of the time. He was willing to put the time in to get to know the people that he was taking pictures of and to kind of get at their core and to make them feel really comfortable. And something like the picture that we have of Mariel Hemingway, Lynda brought in a sheet of the contact sheets, copy of the contact sheets for that image. And almost all of them are straight up normal shots, just normal portraits. She's sitting, she's standing, whatever. Nothing that different. But by the end of it, she was almost like, okay. And he said, so now I got this idea. I was like, sure. But if he started that way, it probably would have looked really weird, But
she might have not agreed to it.
yeah right.
But he established a trust with her. And he just had a gift and a rapport. I mean, he definitely had a talent for that. There aren't a lot of pictures you'll see in his works that are like just landscape or something. It's people. And, there are supporting pictures that aren't people, but that, and for many photographers, that's the tough part. Mm-hmm. They like to steal the picture with a telephoto lens or something, and they don't want to, confront. But Brian, he really respected people, and I think they knew that, and he established a trust. And so he would cover what he would call the safe shot. When he did a take, he would go in and he would do something that he thought would be acceptable to the magazine or newspaper, whatever. And then he would really start pushing the envelope. So he knew he had, pretty much sure he had it covered, but then he would just start doing something really different. And
Muhammad Ali praying.
Right.
I mean,
Right, and I don't think anyone
incredible.
had ever seen Muhammad Ali at that point with that whole series.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you think back, so many of these images date from the 70s, 80s, but they're still powerful today. They haven't lost any of that power.
One of the great stories along this line is the Wynton Marsalis story.
It's one of my,
tell
I
that
love
story.
that.
It is totally, it's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. So one of the things that Brian said is, people just, and I was guilty of kind of Brian worship. And I just thought, he just was kind of dropped, fully formed from, wherever, and just hit the ground running and was great. And he said, no, I wasn't. I didn't say it, but he could see. He's like, he told about when he was a young photographer in Topeka. He would drive around. He was afraid to go up to the subject's house and ring the doorbell. He said, sometimes I'd drive around the block 4 times just getting up the nerve to go ring the doorbell. So, so he gradually, got his chops at confidence. But then you get the Pulitzer Prize, and he said it didn't make it easier to take pictures at all. In fact, the bar was raised. Editors go, oh, this guy's going to bring us something fabulous. It's not good, and good isn't going to be enough. And so life sends him down to New Orleans to cover Wynton Marsalis. And Wynton is a celebrity even as a young guy. And he just really didn't want it. That wasn't how he wanted to spend his time. And here's this kind of portly guy from, Life magazine. It's like getting in his face. And so Brian's kind of, getting the resistance treatment. And finally he said, what would you be doing right now if I wasn't here? He said, I'd be down shooting hoops with my homies. And Brian said, let's go down there. Wynton's like, I'm not taking you down there. I would look like a dope, or, those are my words. But he was like, So then Brian, he's getting desperate. You don't go back to the editor of Life magazine and go, I just couldn't get him to cooperate. No. So he said, let's make a bet. He said, let's play basketball, and whoever wins gets their way. If you win, you get what you want, and if I win, you'll cooperate, or whatever, however he said it. I wasn't there. So Winton's looking at Brian. Here's this overweight old guy with some gray in his beard. He's wearing wingtips. And he thought, okay, here's some easy pickings. So he was maybe a little too confident. So they played horse or something like that. And Winton spotted him a point or two. Whatever it was maybe one too many, because Brian won it. And Winton, and he got his way, and I think ultimately it was to Winton's benefit.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful
Absolutely.
photo in From the Heart that shows that game.
Shows them playing.
Right.
And you can see
Yeah.
the wingtip.
You can see the wingtips.
Right. And you don't realize just how agile, Brian was.
He was really a good athlete. He didn't look it, but he was
knew how to
great, and he
use
was
his body.
extremely competitive. It's like,
Right.
he do whatever it took. So anyway, that's one of my
I think,
favorites.
and he loved life. So I think that was contagious. It isn't just that
Yeah.
his subjects respected him, once they got to know him, but
Right.
that he loved what he did, and that was contagious.
So we have a minute or so left. I just want to ask one final question. Tell us a little bit about the events that have accompanied the exhibition.
They've been really interesting because one of my goals in doing this exhibition was to really blur that line between photojournalism and art, because I think it's an issue that people on both sides of that, haven't really come to grips with. It's like a great photograph's a great photograph. You don't need to think about why it was created and all the rest of this stuff. So we were able to develop a program that took us from, say, the period of the 70s when Brian started out in Kansas with his colleagues who are now in their 70s, 80s, major journalists and photojournalists around the world, the country, but a number of them were able to come and talk about Brian's legacy and what journalism was like at that time, and then bring that up to the present with contemporary photojournalists and faculty in the journalism school, how it's changed, what you still need. You still need intelligence, you still need an eye, you still need to be able to connect with people. You need a mission, all of that kind of things. But then we also were able to have a panel on art photography and what Brian's eye and what it has to say about photography today. It was hard enough, in the past to get photography seen as an art form on its own. A lot of museums, art departments, others wouldn't teach it, wouldn't show it. But I think we fought that battle and won. But now we need to say, a good photojournalist is a fine artist too.
Well, on that note, which I think is a wonderful note to end, I want to thank you both for taking the time to speak with us today about Brian Lanker's amazing work.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you, Paul.
I've been speaking with Lynda Lanker, the widow of photographer Brian Lanker, and Jill Hartz, executive director of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. Hartz curated From the Heart, the photographs of Brian Lanker, which is on view at the museum through April 24th, 2016. Thanks so much for watching.